Welcome to this week's episode of Saulcast, where we're talking about the Season 4 finale, Season 4, Episode 10 of Better Call Saul, titled Winner. We recorded our instant take earlier in the week. You're going to want to check that out to hear our raw, unfiltered emotions right after watching the episode. And in this case, when I say emotions, I do mean emotions. Things may have gotten a little misty in there, I won't lie to you. But this episode, we're going to be very positive as we've taken a couple days to digest, and we have for you a great recap and analysis of the episode. I'm Gil.
I'm Adam.
Let's get into it.
We started out on foot, which gives us a fighting chance.
Through the fire and smoke, a figure emerges. It's...
What did he tell them?
Helen McGill is back.
Jimmy, whatever happens in there, I'm with you.
They dangle these things in front of you. They tell you you got a chance, but it's a lie because they'd already made up their mind.
All that's left is for us to hear your prepared statements.
In the aftermath of last episode, where we ended with Mike realizing that Werner ran, we revisit that storyline. Mike tracks down Werner and he kills him.
All right, that's it for Mike. Nothing much left to say about that, right?
All right, we'll take it the way we normally do. We join Mike. He's with a few of Gus's men, basically ordering them where to look for Werner. You know, you go north, you stay here and watch everybody. They split up. Mike calls a bank and pretends to be Werner's wife. He says that she wired me some money. Mike pretends to be Werner.
I imagine Mike on the phone.
Hello?
Yeah, this is Ms. Werner, please.
Mike pretends to be Werner. He claims that his wife wired him money and he can't remember which branch. They tell him which branch. So he goes off to the branch to continue his search. Sorry, I don't know why I'm so discombobulated.
He meets Fred at the branch, who at first won't help, you know, because he says it's company policy, which makes sense because it's basically it's like a Western Union or like a bank. He can't give out information about people's transactions.
Right. Fred is a much better employee than whoever Mike was talking to on the phone, because he makes an attempt to not just give in. But before we go to Fred, we see that Lalo is spying on all this. He's a safe distance away from the chicken farm. He's got his binoculars out, and he's spying on all of Gus's men. We can see that he's tracking everything they do, their schedule. He's got a diagram of the place, tracking all of their license plates, and then we see them all mobilize, you know, on Mike's orders to go look for Werner.
Can I just say,
yeah,
my dream is to go on a stakeout. I just love the idea of you hunker down, you settle in, and you just make observations. But the best part is you have a thermos full of either coffee or soup, and you got like a nice snack with you.
I felt similarly, but at the end of the scene when Lalo stands up, I asked myself, what is he sitting on over there? And he's just got a few rocks piled up. And it occurred to me that sitting in that position all day, that would probably hurt my knees, and it would be a bit of a strain on the back. So I could do it maybe if I brought a lawn chair. At this point in the episode, where was your Werner live-o-meter? Did you think that he had a chance, or from the start you thought Werner's dead?
It was at this point that I was just sure. I didn't see how he could possibly live, especially once we saw Mike speak to Gus on the phone, but I guess that hadn't happened yet at this point. So the live-o-meter must have been at or let's call it the death-o-meter was at 90%.
So the live-o-meter was at 10%.
Yeah. And I'll add one caveat to this, which is my buddy Casey, who likes to think a lot about this show too, and this was not the last time you'll hear one of his ideas on this episode, but one thing he mentioned when Mike was directing his henchmen to different places, saying, you go north of the highway. You go north on the highway, you go south, you hit up all these hotels and places. He suspected that maybe Mike had a pretty good idea of where Werner was based on already getting the information from the wiring service, right? So maybe Mike was both sending those people out to try to find Werner, but also sending them to places where he was less likely to be because Mike wanted to be the one to find him and hopefully save his life.
I don't think that Mike had spoken to I guess he must have known at least the bank that was used to make that phone call to begin with. So yeah, I think there's some merit to that. Because I think the path he took was clearly the right one. I mean, he so quickly identified the bank branch, and he must have been pretty confident that he was going to be able to do that. So I'll say I'm on board with that theory. I think that makes sense.
Yeah, I think it makes, even if it wasn't for totally benevolent reasons, I think it makes sense that Mike would want to be the one to find him himself. That doesn't mean he's sending the others on a wild goose chase, but I think both because he's the person responsible and he wants to take charge, it makes sense for him to want to find Werner. But also, I do think he would prefer to be the one to find him because it at least gives Werner a fighting chance of survival.
Agreed. So Mike now knows where the money was transferred to. So he goes to the travel wire store where you mentioned that he met Fred, and he is trying to get some information from Fred. Have you seen Werner? Where did he go after he left here? And the way that he convinces Fred to help him is that he says Werner is his brother-in-law and he has early stage dementia. So he's wandering around like crazy. Oh, and by the way, he's diabetic and I have his insulin. So Fred gives in. He tells him that he was here, he took money, and then he took a cab. So Mike asks if he can see the security footage, and when Fred refuses, he says, all right, well, can you tell me where the nearest hospital is? And that worked. So Fred shows him the security footage. Mike sort of shoves him aside. He's like, do you mind? Takes over. And he notices Werner looking at a bunch of brochures before he leaves. Then...
Soak your bones.
What did you say?
One of the brochures, we later find out, says, soak your bones on it.
Does that mean something to you, or you just enjoy that phrase?
It just sounds, it just sounds vaguely deathy. And there's another resort on there called Dolce Vega, which is the one Werner ends up going to. And and Vega is a star. So something like sweet star. And it just made me think about Werner's last moments, which were spent taking in the stars.
Mike goes outside and sits in the back seat of the car. And immediately when he did that, I knew that Gus was going to be sitting next to him. Because if you're ever in a business situation and the front seat is open, but you take the back seat, that means you're going to talk business. I had a client once where we were walking out of the building and we're going to be driving back home. I was giving him a ride, or one of my coworkers was giving him a ride. I went to sit in the front seat and he said, Gil, why don't you sit in the back seat with me? And then I proceeded to have a very uncomfortable 60-minute business-related conversation. So I could relate to Mike here.
Mike probably just wanted to put his buds in and listen to Saulcast, and instead he had to chat with Gus.
He hands Gus the letter that Werner left. And Mike says, for what it's worth, I believe him. This is about seeing his wife, plain and simple. Gus replies ominously, she's on a Lufthansa flight landing in Denver 9 hours from now. So Mike knows that Gus knows where Werner's wife is. And Mike says, there's another way to play this. If I find him first, let me bring him in and finish what he started. And Gus allows him. He says, you think you can find him? Go ahead. At this point, Mike is essentially pleading for Werner's life. He's saying, let me find him first. Gus seems to acquiesce. Now, do you think that in that moment, Gus truly intended to let Werner live if Mike finds him, as he promised?
No. Gus knew from the beginning what the plan was here. And we get confirmation of that later on, because it's not, once Mike finds Werner, it's not like Gus hesitates at all to make it clear what the plan is. But he knows Mike is good at doing what he does, and I think he knows Mike will not fight Gus on this if push comes to shove. So might as well let Mike, who's motivated both to Mike is motivated both to fix up the mess that he made and to at least potentially save Werner's life. So he has every reason in the world to do a good job here of tracking Werner down. So from Gus's perspective, why not let Mike take the lead, especially because he's not the only one working on this?
I do think from Gus's perspective, there's decent reason to not let Mike take the lead, because they have a pretty foolproof plan here. Follow the wife from the airport, you get Werner. I think the reason that Gus allowed Mike to proceed is that if they can catch Werner before his wife shows up, it's just cleaner. Fewer witnesses, fewer people involved. Not that Gus would have any problem taking out Werner's wife, too. So this is not.
Do you think that was the plan from the beginning? Were they planning on killing Werner's wife? Because that's the impression I got from Werner needing to make that call later. Which is why Mike was insisting she can't leave the airport. She needs to just turn around and go back home. For sure. They were going to follow his wife. They get Werner, and then they have to kill her too. Because at that point, a cover story wouldn't work. You couldn't tell the wife that there was an accident. She would have to be taken out as well. Yeah. It seems like Gus is so eager to jump to killing to solve all these problems. And it used to be that I thought this was because it's just the most foolproof method of making sure his empire doesn't come tumbling down. And although in many cases it is the best way to do that, I think we now know he also actually derives joy from harming people who might otherwise stand in his way, even those who do so unintentionally.
I'm not fully on board with that. I believe that Gus takes pleasure in harming people that have hurt him in some way. When it comes to someone like Werner, who is a risk that he's taking out, Werner hasn't done anything to him personally. My feeling is that Gus just has so little conscience that in this situation, if you put aside the fact that human life has value, killing Werner is the easiest way to go. Guarantees he's not going to talk. He's shown himself to be a risk. So I don't know that Gus is taking pleasure in this. I think he's just not putting a whole lot of weight into the decision.
I don't know about pleasure, but I think pleasure is too strong a word, but I think he likes this as a solution. It's like his go-to thing, and he likes it as a technique the same way, a carpenter has a favorite saw they like to use for a certain job. You know what I mean?
It's the saying of when you're a hammer, everything looks like a nail.
Exactly. It's like there are definitely other ways to prevent the wife from mucking up the situation without killing her. Pop her tires, make her car get break down on the way to wherever she's going from the airport, and then have a bystander who's actually one of Gus's people stop by and somehow interact with her in a way that freaks her out, makes her go back, or who knows. There's so many ways to play it, like Mike was saying, but Gus likes the simple, neat, and tidy method of murder.
Yeah, I agree.
And it's because he it's not that he has so little conscience, he has zero conscience. And when you have zero conscience, then murder is the easiest way to handle a lot of this.
Exactly. This is the lowest risk, easiest, cleanest method. Clean. That's why he's letting Mike look for Werner, because it is the cleaner solution if you can make it work. Mike goes back into the travel wire. He makes a call and he asks to hear some of the transcript of Werner and his wife talking the other day. And they talk about where they want to go for vacation. They want to go to the Baden-Baden. So he grabs a few brochures in that area and starts making calls to say, is Werner there, basically. And all the meanwhile, Lalo is continuing to watch Mike, and he follows him as he leaves. While they're driving around, Mike finds the resort where Werner is. And what I loved on that phone call is you can't hear the person on the other side of the phone, but you can surmise that they're asking him, do you want us to leave a message? Do you want us to tell him that, that you're looking for him? He's like, no, I'm good. You don't have to say anything. And Mike notices that Lalo's following him around. So he takes a few turns. He drives into a parking lot and does that great gum trick. Chews up a big wad of gum and then shoves it into the card slot on the way out so people get stuck behind the little arm that moves up and down.
Yeah, and Lalo can't stand it, and he just flips out and just rams the guy in front of him. And what I love is the guy is drinking some kind of big Slurpee or milkshake, and it just spills all over him.
Yeah, Lalo has no remorse.
No, he doesn't care about the milkshake at all.
Lalo loses Mike because he doesn't know which way he turned out of the parking lot. So he goes back to the travel wire. And he's not as good at this whole thing as Mike, right? Mike went in, he had a great story about his brother-in-law with dementia. Lalo's got less patience, I think. So and
it's tough because Lalo looks like a slick kind of character, and he doesn't have the benefit of being on the older side the way Mike is. So for Mike, he was able to just kind of soften his voice and become this believable character, whereas Lalo, it's like, you look like you're up to something.
Right. Yeah, I'm real worried about my brother-in-law. Like, you don't look that worried, I have to be honest with you.
Yeah.
He plays it, at first he plays it pretty well, though. He tries to pretend like he has no idea the cover story Mike used or really what's going on at all.
Lalo doesn't even know why he's doing this other than something's going on, and more information would definitely be helpful. The more I know about their crisis right now, the better. But he has no idea what the payoff of any of this could potentially be for him.
Which just speaks to this Lalo character so much. The fact that he doesn't give a whole lot of thought to what comes next. I get the feeling that he's not necessarily a chess player the way Gus is, but he's fearless, and he does have some instinct for detecting when something of interest is happening that could be something he could leverage in the future. So he can sense that something important is going on. I'm just going to barrel through and follow it to the end and see what I get out of it.
Yeah, he just wings it and sees what happens, and it's probably worked out pretty well for him so far.
So we see a great example of him winging it here with Fred. When he walks in, Lalo claims that his friend was in there earlier in reference to Mike, and Fred asks him if, did you find the brother-in-law? He's like, no, we're real worried about him. I came in, I'm wondering if my friend missed anything. And Fred says, no, I showed him everything. And Lalo just stares at him and says, show me what you showed him. Almost like a command.
Yeah.
When it's not going his way, Fred tries to just walk away from the situation. He takes a phone call from a customer. The camera pans over, and when it pans back, Lalo's gone. And like this is the classic, you see one of the ceiling tiles kind of shifted over. So he went up in the ceiling. Now,
yeah, did you believe that? Like, when that first happened, I was just like, wait, what?
Yeah. They literally did the Batman thing where Commissioner Gordon turns around and he disappeared.
Yeah.
So
that's what that feels like.
So that's what that feels like. I rewatched the scene and I timed it. Fred was on the phone for 13 seconds.
I can't even get out of the couch in 13 seconds.
Yeah, now, I will say they had a very strategically placed vending machine, and it was a shorter than normal vending machine. So if you quickly jumped on top of it, you could have gotten into the ceiling. And if you moved quickly, I think you could make it in 13 seconds.
You don't even know what's in the ceiling. Like, what if there was some duct that was in his way, and then he just has to kind of climb back out where he came from and just hang his head in shame as Fred watches.
I would have loved the scene if when the camera pans over, you just see him like falling down and struggling to get in.
Yeah, or like his feet are dangling out.
But he's in the ceiling. And you hear him crawling through the ceiling and Fred looking up, sort of, what the hell is going on here? Yeah. And then Lalo, now on the other side of the glass, jumps out from the ceiling, pulls a gun on Fred.
And it's so comical that it's hard to wrap your mind around what a deadly character this guy is at the time, especially because we haven't seen him actually commit violence yet at this point. And so it's just so funny what he did. And then you actually see him drop down out of the ceiling with a big smile on his face.
He's having the time of his life. He loves this stuff.
Yeah.
And then cut to Fred's dead in the corner. Lalo's watching the security footage. A customer shows up, starts knocking. He just sort of waves him away. Get out of here.
Yeah, that was hilarious. You see a little bit of blood on. Some people were speculating maybe he didn't kill Fred. Maybe he just knocked him out. But you see some. First of all, he's definitely dead.
Yeah,
no question. You see. You see a little bit of blood spatter on his face.
Yeah, that's right, and on his sort of his cheek. Yeah. Now, is this expected behavior of Lalo by this point, or did this up how evil you view Lalo as?
It's hard to say expected because he seems like he's full of surprises, but I would say this felt right in line with his character. Like he's playful in a very sinister way.
Yeah, I think after the conversation between Lalo and Hector, when they were reminiscing about killing that guy, and you could just see, for them, it was sentimental murder.
Yeah. Sentimental murder. That sounds like a good album cover.
I'm taking that. Nobody steal that.
I'll say one other thing about Lalo is he's sort of the perfect foil for Mike as a character, which is why it was great seeing them play cat and mouse during this episode, because Mike is notoriously thoughtful. He is the chess player. He thinks through step by step what to do in any given scenario, and he's slow and deliberate, and he's not full of jokes, except a little wordplay here and there. Whereas Lalo, constantly messing around, joking, overtly both aggressive and playful at the same time, and doesn't seem to think many steps ahead.
Yeah, I think Mike and Gus versus Lalo is a really interesting matchup, because Mike and Gus are similar in that they both think ahead. They're very thoughtful. They're the chess players. So both of them are a good foil to Lalo in that sense. But then Lalo versus Gus, they're different in that regard, but then they're similar in their sort of lack of conscience and their willingness to kill. So there's just all sorts of interesting comparisons you can draw between both sides of this battle.
Yeah, Lalo and Gus are completely insane.
Yes, and you have to think that at some point in all this, Mike is shaking his head and wondering what he's gotten himself into.
Yeah, I think so. One last prediction about Lalo is I think we're going to have to see something next season to boost our view of his intelligence. I don't think he doesn't look stupid necessarily, but I think so far all we've seen from him is just brute force and charisma. But I think we're going to see that, okay, he's like a force to be reckoned with intellectually too, because if they're setting him up as a foil against Mike and Gus, he's got to have quite a head on his shoulders.
I think we've seen a glimpse of it, and I agree, we've got to see more. We essentially need to see his current plan pan out, so you can see that behind the charisma, behind the crazy barreling into situations where you don't know what's going on, there is a thought that this could lead somewhere useful. The glimpse of intelligence we saw, to me, is when he had his notebook out, and he's tracking all their license plates. He's tracking the movement of all of Gus's men. He's gathering information. That's something that a chess player does.
As far as we can guess, because neither of us play.
I was in the chess club in middle school. but I quit after in home ec. One day we baked cornbread, and I didn't even eat a bite. I don't know why. I was saving it until I got home, and I brought my little baggie to chess club, and then when we all left, it was gone. One of my fellow chess colleagues stole my cornbread that I made.
Wow. I hope you went Lalo on their ass.
Well, I think they went Lalo on me. I was Mike in that situation. Honestly, I was more like Fred.
Yeah.
And then after I left chess club, I was like Jimmy in the car. I was like, no, come on.
I love cornbread.
I think they were actually little mini corn muffins, actually.
That sounds good.
We see Werner at the resort, and I honestly was angry at him when I saw him here because he's just living it up. He has no idea how much trouble he's caused. In fact, when one of the waiters there walks over and says, "You have a phone call," he goes, "Oh, I will be right there. Thank you." Cheerful. No idea how much trouble he's in.
Yeah, as we look back on this, I think you're right that he really didn't understand the threat hanging over him, which is just tragic because if someone made that clear to him, he might not have done any of this.
It very much reminds me of Mice and Men, where you've got the character that just doesn't know any better but has to be put down. You read of Mice and Men?
No.
Oh, you don't know the it's a huge it's a big character trope in there where it's well, you know, Adam Spark notes, just look it up after and you'll see, wow, that was a great comparison.
Yeah. The comparison I'll make is just to Gale, which I keep making this comparison, but Gale was kind of a geek, a little bit of a dweeb, and like he doesn't realize he's like talking chemistry with Gus and like showing off these things. He records himself doing karaoke. He's got like the Ron Paul sticker in his notebook. Like he's like a fun kind of regular guy and enters this underworld of just violence and chaos, thinking that it's not as bad, like not really realizing how bad it is. And I think Werner is in a similar boat here.
Yeah, I found myself this episode wondering if Werner had any previous experience with the criminal world. Because you'd think he'd have to, or else how would he have been a connection for the engineering gig to begin with? But maybe he's been with lower level criminals and he hasn't really trifled with someone like Gus.
And this must tell you, they focus on it a lot already, but I think it's hard to wrap our minds around what an engineering feat this really is. And Gale talks about it too, how it's an architectural feat, and he says it's truly Herculean. It sounds like this is like a momentous achievement, what they've built so far. And the fact that they had to fly, they couldn't even find someone in the U.S. to do it. I don't know if they wanted an international engineer because it reduces the likelihood of getting caught, or if they actually would have preferred a U.S. one, but they just couldn't find one. And I'm sure they also would have preferred one which had more experience doing criminal work, potentially like the Frenchman we saw at first. But the fact they ended up with Werner, who knows what he's doing, but has some personality flaws here, and potentially has little experience doing underground work in the metaphorical sense, shows what a specific and difficult task this must have been.
That's a really good point. I took it for granted that they were bringing in these international candidates. I never really questioned why, but I think you're right. It's just the fact that this is such a difficult process that you need someone really good. And the probability that they happen to be in the country that you're located in is pretty low. That's how rare an entity you're looking for.
Right, and Werner brings up the Sydney Opera House, which his dad constructed, and talks about how much innovation was required to get this done and how many years it took. And I think that comparison served a lot of purposes, but one purpose it might do is demonstrate for us this is Werner's personal version of that, and it might be just as hard and just as much of an achievement.
And it'll probably rake in similar level of dough as the Sydney Opera House.
Oh, yeah. Probably more.
Werner picks up the phone, and on the other end, you hear somebody tell him that he's calling on behalf of Gustavo Fring. And Werner asks, "Oh, is Mr. Fring very upset?" It's Lalo. Lalo is pretending to be a associate of Mr. Fring's, of Gus's. You can see in his car that he has the receipt from the wire transfer from the travel place. So that's how he got Werner's phone number, or that's how he figured out where Werner was going, and he was able to call. Werner starts blabbing immediately. He says, "Oh, did Mr. Fring get my letter?" And Lalo plays dumb, and he says, "Oh, no, he didn't get the letter. What were the instructions that you left again?" And he starts explaining to him about the concrete, and he's giving him details. He's talking again.
Yeah. And you're watching it, and you're like, Werner, shut up. Just stop.
And Mike is thinking the same thing, because he shows up and he grabs the phone, holds it to his ear, and after a little bit, Lalo not getting an answer, says, "Michael, is that you?"
Yeah. That's another glimpse into his intelligence.
And Mike hangs up. Werner starts to apologize, and Mike tells him, "I don't want to hear another damn word out of you." Which I was thinking the same thing.
Yeah. Well, and Mike's pissed. Mike is angry that Werner is making Mike kill him.
Yeah. But then again,
it's not just
Mike,
the headache.
Why didn't you tell him?
Yeah.
You know?
As a friend. Like, listen, Werner, between you and me, as a friend, you're gonna die if you keep doing this.
Bro, put down the Hefeweizen, the Hefeweizen, and listen to me, look at me, all right? Gustavo Fring is not to be trifled with.
He killed a Coati.
He killed a Coati. How would he know about that, though?
Mike knows everything, remember?
All right. The next time we see Mike and Werner, it's the scene. And I don't even want to describe it because I don't know if I'll be able to do justice to it. But, Adam, I'm going to try my best.
All right.
I've been perfecting my Werner accent, my Mike accent, my Mike impression. I memorized all the German that Werner spoke in this scene. And I am now going to recreate that scene for you.
Wow.
No, I'm just kidding. I didn't do any of that.
Oh, man. This seemed like the kind of thing you would do.
Yeah, that would have. Then you would have forgiven me for starting late. You would have said, "Oh, that's why we didn't record when we said we would."
Exactly. That's what I was thinking in my head.
Not just that I had to send a couple of emails for work. But I will do my best. They're parked in sort of the middle of nowhere. It's late. It's dark out. Mike gets out of the car and leaves Werner in there. He gets on the phone with Gus. And my heart kind of skipped a beat. Not in a good way. When Mike tells Gus that, "Oh, one more thing. When I found Werner, he was on the phone with an interested party pretending to be one of your guys. And if there was anything left in the Werner lifometer, that's where it disappeared."
Yeah.
Gus asks Mike if Werner told them anything useful, and he tells him no.
Okay. I still think Mike is screwing up here. He's like, he keeps underselling everything. And with Gus, you don't want to do that.
Mike has done this several times. When they were at the bar and Werner, drew the picture and they came back, Mike assured Gus that Werner gets it. And I think you and I both knew that he maybe didn't quite get it. Mike was asked by Werner if he could see his wife. And once again, Mike walked away from that conversation feeling that I've got Werner in a spot where he understands. And I think that Mike was sort of lying to himself. And he's continuing to do that here. And it's such a mistake because at this point, it is a sure thing that Mike has to kill Werner. But he is playing it down to Gus. And like you said, you never want to lie to Gus.
No.
But I think it's because Mike hasn't given up. He thinks that he might still be able to save Werner. So he felt like he had to try.
Yeah.
I'll just ask before we go on. If Werner hadn't talked, might Gus have allowed him to live?
If Werner didn't talk to Lalo?
Right.
My instinct says no. I think Werner was a dead man.
I agree. Even if in the moment, Mike felt different. And even after Mike tells Gus that Werner didn't tell them anything useful, he goes on and says, all right, I'll bring him in now. Gus cuts him off. He says, no, wait. And that's when Mike realizes that Gus is going to be sending someone to kill Werner. And Mike tells Gus, I'd go another way. And Gus tells him, that I know. Mike tries to plead with him. He says, let it be a mistake. Gus cuts him off. And in very Gus fashion tells him, this discussion serves no purpose.
Yeah.
Wait where you are.
Yeah, so direct. Like, it doesn't even sound like he's upset that Mike disagrees with him. He's just saying, like, there's literally no purpose in having this conversation. It's done. It's decided.
Most people... Yeah, go ahead.
And I think, to your point earlier about whether there was any chance for Werner if he didn't speak to Lalo, it's like what Mike says shortly after this to Werner, which is, no one will ever trust you again. Right? After this, he can't be trusted. Well, then he's finished. He can't even work on the project anymore because after all this stuff, you don't know what if he sabotages it? Who knows? You can't expect you don't know what to expect out of him, and that's not something Gus can tolerate.
Yeah, there are two things I wanted to respond to that you said. First, about Gus, I think that is a defining trait for him, is that he knows when he's set his mind to something. So if he has his mind set, there's no reason to talk about it. He knows he's not going to change his mind. That seems obvious, but that's different from a normal person. Most people can't tell the difference between an idea they have, something they want to do, and something they are set on. Most people's minds can be changed, but Gus knows himself so well, and he knows what needs to be done. It's that chess metaphor again. He knows where the pieces need to go, and you can't talk him out of it. Two, the way they talk about trust in this scene as a quality that defines whether or not you get to live, I thought was really interesting. No one will trust you again, Werner. And then later on, when talking about Werner's men, Mike tells him they're trusted, so they get to live.
Right. There's like this basic status of either trusted or not trusted. And given that they're working in the black market and it's underground, that's all they have to go on here.
In maybe the first heartbreak of the scene, the first of many, after Gus tells Mike to wait where you are, the implication being someone's going to come, someone's going to kill Werner, Mike looks at Werner and tells Gus that he'll take care of it.
And you just see Werner's silhouette just sitting in the car in the passenger seat, like as though he's just like waiting for what they're going to do next. He doesn't realize.
Yeah, still totally oblivious, still believes that he might get to see his wife right now.
Yeah.
Mike pounds on the hood of the car to tell Werner to get out. And this is where he confronts him and asks him, what did you think was going to happen? And this is where Werner tells him, I thought that my friend Michael would be upset with me, but would understand over time. And Mike sadly tells him, it was never up to me.
Yeah. And one last thing to comment on from that conversation with Gus. So once that phone call ends and Mike turns and looks at the car, right before he goes back to do what must be done, he just mutters to himself, God damn it. And his words almost slur together. And it's like, this is when we can see some real sadness in Mike. Like he is not doing well inside.
No, because he's done criminal stuff, but it's usually stealing something here and there. It's being security. This is a whole different game. Werner wants to talk to Mr. Fring. He says, I'm sure that if I explain things, he'll understand.
Right, and I think he wants to explain things just so that he can still maybe go to the hotel and just spend a night with his wife. For him, it's a debate between, do I have to go back to the construction site now, or can I at least just have one night with my wife first?
Yeah, he even says it. He says, look, let me go back. Let me see her for a little bit. What's the difference if I go back tonight or tomorrow? Eventually, Mike has to cut him off and say, Werner, nothing you can say or do will make anyone trust you ever again.
That's when Werner crosses his arms, and finally he gets it. He's like, I will go home, never breathe a word of this to anyone ever. I will give the money back. I'll tell no one, I swear. Please, Michael, you know I will keep silent.
And he doesn't just cross his arms, he looks around, and he realizes, wait a minute, we are in the middle of nowhere. Yeah. That's when it hits him that this is an execution. When Werner essentially starts pleading for his life the way you just described, Mike cuts him off and tells him that he needs to call his wife and convince her to turn around because she's being followed. And it's not stated, but the implication is that if you can't get her to turn around and go back home, Gus is going to kill her. And that's what snaps Werner into action.
Do you think it's going to be an issue later that Mike intervened and basically saved Werner's wife?
It's hard.
Because that sounds like he was acting without permission a little bit.
I actually didn't get that impression. I think that earlier when Mike was essentially pleading with Gus, let me find him first, I think part of the reason Gus let him go and search for Werner is because if they can get to him before his wife, it's cleaner. They don't have a witness they need to take out.
Right. Yeah, I don't think there will be any consequences for Mike for doing that, but at the time it did feel like he was going rogue a little bit by having Werner do this.
Yeah, I think it's a fair reading of the scene. I didn't register it that way. I thought that Gus would be okay with this. In the next heartbreak, Werner calls his wife, tries to tell her to turn around, and I sort of saw this coming. She flew all that way from Germany. She's not going to take this easily, so he has to yell at her. He has to tell her that he doesn't want to see her, and that's what gets her to turn around. So his last words to his wife are him yelling at her.
Poor Werner.
And then at this point, he's accepted it all, right? He understands what's going on finally, and he gets down to business. You pointed it out in the instant take. He does 3 things at this point. Number 1, if my wife doesn't hear from me, she's going to go to the police. Mike assures him, don't worry, we are going to give her a story. There was an accident. She'll have closure. She won't ask any questions. Number 2, what about my men? And as you pointed out, he's been calling them boys all season. Finally, he calls them men. Mike says they're trusted. They're going to finish the job. They're going to go home. And lastly, he asks, is there no other way? And I was a bit frustrated with Mike at this point because he doesn't answer him. He sort of nods his head. He makes it clear, but you're about to kill this man. You need to man up. Look him in the eyes and tell him what you're about to do. But he can't bring himself to do that.
Yeah, and it was pretty obvious that Werner was done for at this point, but some small part of me felt a flash of, wait, maybe Mike has an idea based on the look he gave, and it would be pretty unfair if Werner got that same feeling for a second.
You already made reference to this, but next Werner just says, There are so many stars visible in New Mexico. I will walk out there to get a better look.
Yeah, and he kind of says it with a little bit of a smirk, like he's almost playing along with Mike, like, I'll go take a look at the stars and, you'll do what you have to do. And it was kind of, it's weird. It's like he's assenting, to what's about to happen. He's accepting it. He's going along with it. It's almost like he's doing Mike a favor. And I think he's like, it's his way of helping out a little bit, saying, I really screwed up. I realize now. I realize this isn't easy for you either, Mike. And I'll just go take a look at the stars and make it maybe a little bit easier on you.
I was going to ask you that very question. Is that why he did it? And I think it is at least a big part of it. He did this for Mike because it's easy to forget how much time has gone by, but they've been working together for almost a year. And he's one of the only human beings that Werner has interacted with in the last year. So they're friends.
Yeah, they're friends. I mean, they've talked about their papas.
They talked about their papas.
Yeah.
And Mike does not talk about his papa to many people.
Yeah. You got to earn that.
And then we cut to a great shot of the landscape at night where you can see the silhouette of Mike walking behind Werner, and then he shoots him, and you see that gun flare, and that's that. I went back to season 3 of Breaking Bad, kind of on your recommendation, when Mike is going to kill Walter. You were talking about Jesse killing Gale, but I was curious to see how Mike approached this, essentially the same situation with Walt, where he had to go kill him. And I'll say that Mike wasn't any more straightforward with Walt. Or I'll say this. With Mike and Werner in this scene, Mike looked Werner in the eyes, and it was pretty clear that I'm about to kill you. And they had a moment. With Walt, Mike lied to him. He told him, I need you to go downstairs and check out this issue we're having, in the lab. So he's going to shoot him in the back of the head. And I think that just shows the difference in how Mike will treat you as executioner if he respects you and if he doesn't. If he doesn't respect you, he's gonna lie to you and shoot you in the back of the head. Then I compared Walt and Werner. How did Werner handle it? He tried to change Mike's mind, but he never outright begged, and he pretty quickly accepted his fate. Walt, the moment he realizes what's going on, he's like, no, please, don't do this. Come on, don't do it.
Well, that's sort of Walt was persistent. He's probably the most persistent character in this universe.
Yeah, he did not want to let it go. And in this situation, Walt also had something in his back pocket, right? He had Jesse waiting for him to give the order to kill Gale.
Yeah.
But it was just interesting. Oh, and the other thing is that Walt also pleaded to speak to Gus. That's what everyone does. Let me talk to Gus. They have no idea that that's just not going to help you.
Yeah. If anything, it can only make things worse, probably.
Yeah. Yeah, he'll say, put Mike back on. Mike, I want you to torture him a little bit first.
Yeah. Go Kawati on his ass. Here's one thing about Mike. You bring up Breaking Bad, and so that's years later, and Mike is still a hired gun, killing people. Couldn't he do something more with his life? Like, couldn't he make a living as a real security consultant? He's clearly very talented. He seems like he really doesn't want to have to do all of this stuff. It's always like, here's another thing I have to deal with from his perspective. But it seems like one theme of this show is the way you become tainted once you enter the criminal world. We see that with Jimmy, even this episode, or especially in this episode, talking about how once you've dabbled there, you're kind of marked. And I think not just externally in the eyes of others, but inside, you know what you've done, and it's sort of it becomes the way you operate. It becomes what you know. And it seems like that's what's going on with Mike. And it's a shame that he's stuck in this world, because I think he could do a great job and make a good living for himself doing almost anything else.
I think one of the themes of Breaking Bad and Better Call Saul is that morality is a real thing that matters. When you do bad stuff, people around you get hurt, and it's not good for you personally either. And Mike is experiencing that firsthand. There is the question of where does Mike go from here? Even from, thematically, just what we're learning about Mike, we're watching him develop. And I think there's still a question of why is he doing all this? We have some thoughts on that, but like you said, he can be successful legitimately. So I wonder if that's going to be part of what's explored next season. Later on, we're back in the underground lab, and Gale's there.
Yeah.
Which is great.
Which one of your questions on last week's episode was, do you think we'll see Gale again?
I was very happy to see him. I'll say I'm not 100% sure why he's there.
Yeah.
But he's down in the lab with Gus, and he's loving it. He's like, this place is amazing. It's a feat of architecture. I could probably cook something right now. You want me to cook something right now? He's like eager to get started.
Yeah.
And Gus says, no, not until it's ready. And he's angry too. So Gale sort of is taken aback, and he, in his very Gale way, oh, of course. I'm just gonna go upstairs and I'm gonna get out of here.
He's like, I'm gonna go up and check. Okay, yep. And then he just leaves.
And then he sees Mike on the way out and says, "Oh, hello."
Yeah.
And then Mike and Gus stare at each other. Which reminded me of, if you watch the trailer for Creed 2, for those of you that are unfamiliar with the mythos of Rocky Balboa, there was a movie back in the 80s where Rocky fought a Russian guy, a Russian boxer that killed his friend. And now, fast forward 20, 30 years, there's a movie where that Russian's son is fighting the son of the guy that he killed. So Rocky and this Russian guy, Drago, have a bit of a history. And in the latest trailer for Creed 2, they look at each other the same way that Mike and Gus look at each other here.
It's such an elaborate explanation, but it does seem like something that's worth checking.
Yeah. This is probably a reference, is my thought.
Yeah, definitely. This is the first Rocky reference.
Any thoughts on why Gale is here, either from a story perspective, why did Gus bring him here, or even just thematically, why the writers of the show thought it would be good for us to see Gale?
On a practical level, I suppose Gus just needs to get right back to business and bring Gale in and say, take a look, what do we need in order to turn this into a functioning lab? Because Gus needs to act quickly and figure out the next steps. And Gus is a machine. It doesn't matter to him the moral implications of everything else that just happened. Nothing is weighing on him. All that matters is, okay, time to move on with the business. So now is as good a time as any. Why wait?
And I think from a writing standpoint, they recognize that it makes sense for Gale to be there. And I think they wanted to show that to us as almost a favor. You guys just went through hell. We showed you some dark stuff. You've earned a little bit of Gale.
Yeah. Nothing better than some Gale at the end of a tough episode.
You think we're done with the Mike storyline this episode, don't you? Because that's the last scene with Mike, Gus, Lalo, any of them. But There's a little bit more, a little parcel that you probably didn't pick up on.
I don't think I did.
A little known fact is that AMC airs Three Stooges, like sketches, old videos here and there. And after this episode, they aired a Three Stooges short film titled All Gummed Up.
Wait, what? You're just making this up right now.
No, I was rewatching earlier today. I recorded it on YouTube TV, and it just popped up in black and white, all gummed up. Is that a coincidence?
No way. No way is that a coincidence.
I'm going to go on record and say I believe I'm the only Better Call Saul fan that noticed that. But to be honest, I don't know if that aired on the original airing or if I was watching a repeat. But if I was watching the original one that aired or a repeat, either way, somebody out there chose to air that short film after this episode. I'm going to go down and say I think it was intentional as a reference to Mike's clever use of gumming up that machine.
Whoever made that decision should be hired onto the writing staff of Better Call Saul, because they've got the ability to make those little references and detailed little points that we like to see. Well, that said, it couldn't have been on the original airing because they always go into like Lodge 49 right after.
But it was a short film, so maybe they aired it for 5. And actually, this was an extra long episode of Better Call Saul, so maybe they didn't like the idea of starting Lodge 49, 17 minutes after the hour, so they thought shove in some Three Stooges, and then we can start at a nice even 10:30.
Good point.
That could have been a full episode, but on top of everything we just talked about, we have the Jimmy and Kim storyline.
We open up Jimmy's story with one of many flashbacks that we've had this season. This is to the time that Jimmy got his approval by the Bar Association to begin practicing law. We see a few people go first, where it looks like the system works where you have an established lawyer vouch for you, and you see the first two people who get vouched for, you see the same kind of manner of doing it, where they say, "It is my great honor to vouch for so-and-so." And they'll introduce them as, in some way that really makes them seem like a special person who deserves to be approved. Then we see Chuck do it for Jimmy, and he doesn't say it's my honor, nothing like that. He doesn't say, I stand here before you today to vouch for this wonderful person. He just says, I'm Charles McGill, and I vouch for my brother, Jimmy. Or James. So already we're starting with Chuck undercutting Jimmy's accomplishments and making it sound like one of the only reasons Jimmy is getting Chuck's approval is just the familial relation. In fact, it is the only reason.
In that moment, do you think that Jimmy saw it that way, or was he sort of naive and believed that there was actually some pride from Chuck's side?
I think he's probably pretty naive about it at this point, because if he was already picking up on all of this, he probably wouldn't have been so eager to have Chuck at the party later and bring him in with the karaoke and all that stuff. He's trying to be friends with Chuck, and he really still wants Chuck to be proud of him.
Yeah, I read it the same way.
So we all see them celebrating at karaoke. Is it Ernie? Is that the one who was singing?
Yes, I believe Ernie, short for Ernest.
Yeah, there we go. So we see him singing a Total Eclipse of the Heart. That was funny. And we see him again at, is it Sandpiper? No, Sandpiper is the name of the assisted living facility. When he was working for another when Jimmy was working for another law firm, Ernie was there, right?
Yeah, and actually I have to correct myself. It's not Ernest, it was Ernesto, which now that I say it, right. I remember Chuck saying that all the time. Ernesto. Yeah.
And so Ernesto is not a lawyer, right? He's just there celebrating as, was he a paralegal? No, not a paralegal. He's some kind of assistant, associate, something.
I know that he took care of Chuck for a while.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's just interesting. I didn't realize the only reason I bring this up is I didn't realize how long that they knew each other.
So I was surprised to see him there because I don't know why I assumed it, but I always felt like when we saw him back in season 1 that was pretty early on in Jimmy and Kim's relationship with Ernesto. But there was really no reason to assume that. Apparently, he's been at HHM for a while.
Yeah, I thought it was early too. Not that it really matters that much. He's a kind of a peripheral character, but just something I noticed.
Did you think he was going to be a good singer or a bad singer? Because I could have seen it going either way.
I thought he was going to be a bad singer because he played this kind of goofy character a little bit. And I think I was right.
I agree.
Yeah. Turns out Jimmy's not the best singer either. And in fact, Chuck is a lot better than he is. And everyone was made aware of that fact because Chuck kind of stole the show when they were singing Winner by the Swedish band ABBA. Or ABBA.
And we shouldn't be surprised that he's a good singer because he was in Spinal Tap.
That's right. And I forgot about that. And once again, I was reminded of this by Casey. And it once again solidified for me the affinity this show has for comedic actors.
I love this show for that because it's always... There's something gratifying about seeing somebody that's typically in a comedic role get stretched and have to do something a little different with their acting. It's like when you see Adam Sandler in a movie like Punch Drunk Love, typically known for goofy comedy roles, and then the writers of that movie, or the writer of that movie, similar to the writers of Better Call Saul with Chuck, they give him a chance to really show what he can do.
Right. Or when we see an actor like Vince Vaughn in something like Brawl on Cell Block 99, or these super gritty roles. Mm-hmm. Chuck steals the show during their karaoke. Not a big deal. Jimmy looks like a little taken aback, but not majorly. I think he's just happy to see that Chuck stayed and is participating. It's not a big deal. But it is a little sign of things to come for them in the future. They go back to what I assume is Jimmy's place because it's like a studio apartment. And Chuck is taking care of Jimmy. He gets the garbage ready for him in case he pukes overnight. Jimmy, meanwhile, is talking about how they should slap another M on HHM, because it's symmetrical. It's better that way. It's like nipples, But 4 or 6 nipples, that he submits to the court that's overkill.
He has way better drunken monologues than I've ever witnessed in the real world.
Yeah.
They're usually more, you're so great, you're basic. I ever tell you know what, I hate you. I'm like, can't you talk about nipples or something?
Oh, you'll say that next time. Chuck is not having it. He's just kind of being all business. But then he looks at his watch and realizes, okay, I got to stay here. I'm not going to be able to go back home because I have meetings in the morning. So that's when he just asks Jimmy, do you want pancakes or eggs? And I love how emphatically Jimmy responds, pancakes.
I would have been disappointed if he didn't say pancakes.
Yeah. Especially when in a drunken state, whose thought would ever be, I want eggs in the morning?
Yeah, I remember I went out with this guy that I'd never really seen him drink before because he was a friend from high school, and we didn't really keep in touch in college. And when we all got back together, I saw him drink for the first time I'd ever witnessed it. And we'd all had quite a lot that night, and we go to a diner like in the 2, 3 in the morning, and he ordered a corned beef.
That's intense.
Yeah, I thought that was really... I never forgot that. I can't even remember who it was, but that corned beef is burned in my memory.
The appetite just changes when you're under the influence. And Chuck just gets side by side in bed with Jimmy. It was pretty funny. It was kind of cute to see them like that. Jimmy starts singing Winner again. And I was proud of Chuck for joining in. It shows you that it's not all black and white, their relationship. It's not like Chuck was just always just a jerk to him and Jimmy always resented him. It was more complicated than that. Like they just looked like two brothers kind of joking around.
Yeah, they use flashbacks a lot this season, or flash forwards, I think, in an ironic way. If things are going well in the present, they show us a flash forward to things not going so well. If things aren't going well in the present, they show us a flashback to when things were great. You know, they love that irony. So I think here we're seeing a moment of true affection between Jimmy and Chuck, which is extremely rare. And you might wonder, well, then why show us the opener where Chuck was a little bit disingenuous, not showing Jimmy the respect that you'd want him to in that opening where they were kind of confirming and vouching for Jimmy. But I think it would have been a lie not to show that. They never had a pure relationship where Chuck was an absolute good to Jimmy.
Right. Well,
so if they're going to show us that good, they've got to show us some of the other side too.
And the part that they show you about Chuck that is not good are the parts where it comes to Jimmy's law career. That's where Chuck does not act so friendly to him. But in the end, he does help him, right? But he doesn't do it in any way that demonstrates pride or anything like that. And then the other point is when Chuck has an opportunity to look better than Jimmy in front of a crowd, especially a crowd of his legal compatriots. So when it came to work and when it came to pride, that's when Chuck would kind of put up this wall between them. And on the note of the song Winner, my friend Casey, who and I alluded to, he had some thoughts on this. He pointed out an interesting bit of trivia about this, which is the song was written by one of the male members of ABBA at the time when he was going through a divorce with one of the female members of the band. He wrote that song for her to sing, and she ended up singing it. And so that's pretty awkward, first of all. But the point that he makes is that the song is being written by someone who's heartbroken and written from the perspective of kind of like his wife who's winning the divorce. And he's kind of putting these words in her mouth. Literally, she's going to go sing them for the public, which is what happened.
I would also just say in the moment when they're performing the karaoke, Jimmy pulls Chuck up on stage. So in the same way that this band member of ABBA put words in somebody else's mouth, Jimmy's sort of doing the same thing with Chuck, even in that moment where he's asking Chuck to sing this song. And I think that song, it speaks to the relationship between Jimmy and Chuck, where Jimmy does see Chuck as the winner who's taking it all. So even on just that level, I see a pretty big similarity once you point it out.
Right. As though they can't both have their own success. One has to be at the expense of the other. And Chuck has to define his success in terms of being above Jimmy and above other people. And Jimmy's constantly defining himself as being down and being low and trying to claw his way above and get to the 50th floor, like he says in his monologue later. Jimmy is at Chuck's grave, and we know he's up to something right from the get-go. He's sitting there saying, watermelon pickles, 1001, 1002, until these two people approach him, and then he kind of starts playing his role of being the grieving brother. It seems like it's been a year since Chuck's death, and so he wants to be seen by as many people as possible in a state of grief, in a state of reverence for his deceased brother. These people talk to him a little bit about the Native People's Education Fund and just the way that they knew Chuck and how they regret not coming over there sooner. Then he comes back to Kim in the car to kind of refuel. He's in great spirits, actually, despite having just stood just feet away from the corpse of his brother. Kim gives him some coffee and a Danish. Again, exactly the kind of thing I want, like a stakeout, or you just got to hang out, and it's nice outside, stay in one place, drink some coffee, eat some snacks.
This was such an interesting ruse from Jimmy and Kim, because every other Slippin' Jimmy we've seen has been about taking something from somebody. Who would have ever predicted that there would be a whole plot that was just about convincing people that Jimmy cares that his brother is dead?
Yeah. And it's amazing because for most people, that would just be the organic thing that would happen. And with Jimmy and Kim, we see Kim literally engineering a sequence of emotions that should occur in his speech later. As though like all these feelings are just a thing to manipulate like architecturally.
It's hard to put into words exactly what's so impressive about this, but there is just something to the fact that we're watching a show where we, as an audience, have struggled to understand the emotional state of the main character. We've struggled to understand if he even has emotions in the same way that a normal person does. We've used the term sociopath a few times, usually a little tongue-in-cheek, but some truth in that. That's where we're coming from. And in this episode, we literally have Kim, like you said, index cards with emotions written on them, rearranging them, trying to figure out how to convince people. There's just something really clever about that. And just kudos to the writers.
Yeah, that was great. And when we ask Kim, how did it feel? She wants to hear Jimmy say something like, it was cathartic to stand by his grave and to just say goodbye. That's the kind of thing she might want to hear from him, but what he says is, it felt like Guy looked sad. So she really wants to find out that there was something underneath Jimmy, that he had some grief somewhere lurking inside him, that he was human. And at the same time, she's helping him craft this lie to make it look like he is. And that ends up being her undoing at the end when she's surprised that Jimmy did it so well. Once she realized that even she can be fooled by Jimmy's ability to act and feign emotion, they're no longer on the same page. She feels disconnected. And so this little interaction here and some more interactions we get throughout the episode are foreshadowing of this big conflict that's coming. As part of this elaborate ruse to make everyone believe that Jimmy feels all this grief over Charles, we next see a scene at HHM in which they've donated the Charles McGill reading room. And so it's a library. I think it might be the same library we see Jimmy studying in a flashback several episodes ago. Jimmy's young crew is there, the film crew. We see that the female member of the crew is there dressed as a waitress, and she's serving food. I like that he has these people he can just call on when he needs to do a scam.
Yeah, and they're there basically to spread the rumor that Jimmy is the one who donated all the money for the dedication.
Right.
Like, I heard that. I heard it was Jimmy. He killed it to this.
And as soon as Schweikart finds out, he's like, "Oh, I wanted to say hi," and Kim is like, "Well, he's not feeling so great, because of the circumstances." Reflecting on Chuck,
I loved Schweikart showing up because that made me realize that this whole scam doesn't just get Jimmy his law license back; it also just ties up other loose ends. It basically excuses the last 12 months of behavior because Schweikart's thinking, you know what? When Jimmy acted up that time, he was probably broken up about his brother. So it wasn't even an intended consequence of doing all this, but Jimmy just fixed his Schweikart relationship, probably.
It worked so perfectly. And one thing that was always great about Breaking Bad and Better Call Saul is they would open up a lot of loose threads, and it would give you so much to work with in terms of predicting what could happen next, because you're like, well, maybe this comes back to bite them, or maybe that one thing that happened 5 episodes ago is going to somehow affect what happens now. And they managed to do that even with a little subtle interaction, like the one he had with Schweikart when he went off the rails talking about the joking around about plans for a ski trip for their law firm. So to see that come back and to see Schweikart's mind change about Jimmy from this one little stunt that he's pulling, it's just a great way to tie up loose ends and to demonstrate how effective this is.
Yeah, nobody ties up loose ends better than Vince Gilligan and his team there.
Kim goes out to see how Jimmy's doing as Jimmy stands there facing away from everyone, smoking and pretending to be sad. Jimmy proposes a plan, and I'm 90% sure he was joking, but it seems like there's I think we're meant to believe that it's unclear whether or not he's serious here.
Yeah. He wanted to light the judge's chambers on fire and save her.
Yeah. So most likely a joke, but Kim's not amused. And I think we're meant to see it as, yeah, it's a joke, but it actually is kind of the way Jimmy thinks. It's not totally out of the question.
It was an idea that he put on the table to consider.
Yeah.
And, once you see it's not going to work, he doesn't do it, but it's in his head as a possibility.
Yeah. I think the way he comes up with these schemes is, with brainstorming, you have to be open to any possibility, just whatever pops up, and then you eliminate from there. This is one of the things that popped up. I'm sure he wouldn't have done it, but his mind is capable of producing such ideas. It's like I remember reading about this old CIA proposed operation called Operation Northwoods, which was never carried out, but it was a hypothetical scenario during the Cold War, when America had more issues with Cuba. There was a plan that was never actually enacted to have CIA agents, I think, who would play the part of Cuban terrorists hijack an American plane in Florida to turn the public against Cuba and provide a reason to somehow attack them or invade them, something like that. I'm sure I'm getting some facts wrong, but the point is there are people who are capable of coming up with stuff like that, even if they don't necessarily intend to use it. And Jimmy would have fit right in.
Yeah. And another small detail there is Jimmy wants to eat. They have these little sliders, cheeseburgers.
Oh, yeah.
But he's too sad to eat. Thought
yeah,
that was just a
he
nice
really
touch.
wants some. Another part of this plan is for Jimmy to start participating in that scholarship organization, that scholarship fund that was going to be in Chuck's name. As we heard earlier in the season, was willed by Chuck. And so we see Chuck's portrait overlooking this whole meeting, this whole conference room at HHM. Jimmy's at the table. And they did a great thing where for every kid that would come in, we would hear Howard summarize some of their accomplishments. Then as soon as they open their mouth to start speaking, it just cuts to the next one.
Yeah, I think that was just trying to give us the same feeling that you would have sitting in that room, which is you'd hear a lot of kids talk, and it would all sort of bleed together where you can't remember what one was saying over another. You're not quite paying attention. It also just underscores what Jimmy points out later, which is they already knew who they were going to pick. It doesn't matter what those kids said. So why even show it to us? It has no relevance.
Yeah, exactly. So once they're done, Howard makes sure that all the kids got their lunch and some kind of goodie bag. Then they vote for who should get the scholarship. So they have 3 to give out. Jimmy's vote for this girl whose last name is Esposito does not win. She doesn't get it. And when he brings that up, one of the women at the table goes, "Oh, Esposito, you mean the shoplifter?" And Jimmy tries to defend her. She got good grades. She has good recommendations. She made some bad choices, but she's had 2 good years since then. And, this is her bad choice is what made her interested in the law to begin with. He's clearly projecting here. And he then gets Howard to agree to a revote. I actually think it's kind of nice of Howard. Like, it's good to see Howard is back on his feet. He's in good spirits again. He seems to have the same old enthusiasm he used to. I couldn't tell if Howard was being a jerk by proposing a revote or if he was at least just showing like, yeah, okay, Jimmy, I'm receptive to your ideas. I think it was more of a dick move. But
it's funny that you read it that way. I think that the writers showed it to us where Howard says, "All right, Jimmy, that's a good point. Let's take a revote." And then it cuts to Jimmy outside chasing after her. I fell for it. I thought, oh, wow. They voted for him. They voted for her because they all felt bad for Jimmy and they went along with him. And then he runs over. He's like, "Yeah, you didn't get it." But I guess I fell for it because I thought Howard was being genuine and he was genuinely moved by what Jimmy said. And I'm not sure if it was him being a dick move or him doing a dick move or just him doing what he's supposed to do in that situation. Yeah, which is just to maintain face of being a good person. We got to take a revote based on what Jimmy said.
Yeah, I think it's mostly just like what you just said, just the right thing to do here. Especially Jimmy has some sway here because he's the brother of Chuck. The right thing to do is, let's just take a revote. But the thing is, Jimmy actually said, let's bring her back in the room and talk to her some more. And Howard didn't do that. He said, okay, let's take a revote. So that to me rubbed me a little bit the wrong way. It made me think maybe he's just doing the revote as a formality to say, look, we did it. You still lost. I don't think Howard was that overt about it because I actually think I don't think Howard dislikes Jimmy. I just think he's not going to change there's rules by which this has to operate. He's not just going to change it because of Jimmy's preference.
He's back to the same old Howard is what I think.
Yeah, which is good. I'm happy to see that. Yeah. Because he didn't look so good last time. Jimmy goes out and catches up with Esposito and tells her that she did not make the cut, and her mistake is basically all that will define her as far as people like that are concerned, and it's never going to change. They'll smile and pat her on the head, but they'll never let her in. But that doesn't matter. She doesn't need them because she's going to do whatever it takes. She doesn't have to play by the rules. She'll do what other people won't, and she'll be smart. She'll cut corners, but she'll get to the 50th floor and look down on them while they're all in the 35th floor. You're going to make them suffer, and basically the winner takes it all, and you need to remember that.
Does he say the winner takes it all?
Yeah, he said that.
Oh, it was that overt of a callback to the song.
Yeah, it was. Now, I enjoyed watching this, and I think it gave us a lot of insight into his character. Did you think it was a little too on the nose, or was it appropriate?
I think it's in character for Jimmy. We've seen him do things like this before. Remember when he was playing bingo at the old folk, or he was running the bingo game at the old folks' home a couple seasons ago, and he went on that whole monologue about the Chicago sunroof? So he is known to go on monologues that lay out whatever he's going through at the time. So a bit on the nose in that it's essentially spelling out for us a lot of Jimmy's motivation, but none of it's a shock to us, right? We've pieced a lot of this together. So it didn't feel cheap to me. And it felt like something he would actually do based off of what we've seen in the past.
Yeah. And it's funny because he just assumes he knows what this girl thinks. He thinks that they're kindred spirits here, when all he knows about her is that she shoplifted once and now she wants a scholarship.
Or her parents made her try getting the scholarship and she doesn't even want it.
Yeah. So he's like, you understand what I'm telling you, right? And she says, I think I do. And he goes, all right, go get him. I don't know if she actually understands. I wonder what kind of impact this would have on her, if anything. But obviously it's more about Jimmy than it is about her. And he's basically laying it all out, like you said. This is about how he feels that the mistakes he made in the past will define him forever. Once, he became Slippin' Jimmy, and that's all Chuck could ever see in him. Since then, that's all anyone will ever see in him. But sort of to get back at them or to punish them for this, he's going to embrace this cutting corners attitude, this no playing by the rules, and that's how he's going to get ahead of them and succeed. The frustrating thing about this is it's something he totally does to himself. I think he had his Slippin' Jimmy ways, he broke the rules, and Chuck defined him that way for sure, and Chuck never changed his opinion of Jimmy as a result. But that doesn't mean Jimmy had to always see himself that way. He could have broken free of that and went the legitimate route, but he didn't want to. It was his own choice.
It's sort of the who started it. He would say, yeah, I went the Slippin' Jimmy route because they made me. And that might very well be true. The universe may have treated him poorly, or the people around him treated him poorly. The problem is that he holds all of humanity accountable for that.
Exactly. And so he sees it as his right to break the rules and screw people over. Jimmy is then in the parking garage and his car won't start. He slams on the wheel. He's screaming, "No, no." He starts sobbing to himself. He's just reaching a breaking point of frustration here. I think you hit the nail on the head during the instant take when you said he's just pissed off because he's realizing no matter what, people are always going to see me as this subordinate person to Chuck, first of all. Second of all, they're going to see me as a rule breaker, as someone who's tainted by the past mistakes that I've made. And so there's no way I'm getting my license back. So he's pissed off about that. I also think it frustrates him to see a little girl who he can relate to already be put in that box the way he was put in that box. And there is some truth to what he's saying. It's like as soon as he brings up the name Esposito, that woman goes, "Oh, the shoplifter." So you can see why he would be frustrated by this. And even though a lot of it is self-induced, he's right that the judgment of others could definitely have stood in his way many times in his past.
It's like if you went back in time to prevent a mistake that you made in the past, but then it happens anyway, you'd be like, damn it. It's a little bit of what he's going through right now.
Yeah, it's just like this never-ending cycle of trying to fix his reputation and just never escaping it. Jimmy gets home to Kim, who is engineering the best approach to Jimmy's statement, which I think is the following day. She's talking about, let's have you discuss your future plans, then we'll go into remorse, then you talk about Chuck, and you'll talk about his legacy. Jimmy is more focused on the scholarship thing, and he's basically just saying, yep, we gave scholarships to some 3 good kids, and he's pretty upset about it, but Kim is focused on their work that they have cut out for them. So Kim has been very supportive throughout all of this, but it turns out Jimmy has his own plans, which we find out soon enough. Kim thinks, we set it all up, and with the reading room donation, the scholarship, your performance at the cemetery, the dominoes are set up, and we just got to knock them down, which is true. But Jimmy is stuck in that mindset, and he says, I can say whatever I want to the board, but I'm still that guy. So he thinks that this engineering that Kim is doing might be for naught.
And it's exactly what he went through with Kim last week, where he says to her, "I'm always slipping Jimmy to you." And he's feeling the same thing with this board.
Right. And so his response to that, which encapsulates his approach to a lot of things in life, is, well, if you're going to see me as that guy, then I will be that guy, and I'm going to reap all the advantages that come along with it. Which means he can open up Chuck's letter, let Chuck do the talking for him. He can basically manipulate people. He got a license to do that because of their judgments against him. So he's ready to use the letter, and they're at the approval hearing the next day. He mentions that Chuck wrote a great letter, and Kim cautions him and says it's not just the words, it's how you read them. Because you can imagine Jimmy reading Chuck's words, but if he does not inject enough emotion into it, or he doesn't seem moved by them, the whole thing's pointless. And Kim reminds him, whatever happens in there, I'm with you. And so that's good for her to say, because last time when he did not get the approval, he was lashing out at Kim a lot afterward, and I think it was because he was in part insecure that if he didn't perform as she expected, he just wouldn't be good enough for her.
When she says, "I'm with you," no matter what happens, it underscores how the writers led us astray early on in the season, where we were all so sure that Kim is going to walk away from Jimmy because of Jimmy going down this criminal path. And now we literally have watched her orchestrate all these things, including spending tens of thousands of dollars, not her money, probably Jimmy's money, but really putting some real investment into trying to trick people into thinking that Jimmy cares about Chuck. and she's helping him to it's not just that they're trying to trick some people, it's important people in the world of law. In that moment, I just sort of reflected back on how wrong we were and how good a job they did leading us in that direction without being disingenuous. It was all fair, what they showed us.
As Jimmy is reading the letter, he stops and says, I'm sorry, I can't do this. I was going to try to move you, but this letter is between me and him, and it should stay that way. Were you swayed by this?
Yeah, I feel dumb, but I fell for this totally.
Yeah, so did I. Because the things he said next seem true. Like, this is the right way for it. A normal person in Jimmy's shoes would feel this way about Chuck. He says, he loved me as a brother, but not as a lawyer. And if you were able to make him proud, like, wow, like, what a feeling. But he could also be kind of a hard ass. And you see people on the board kind of chuckle because they knew Chuck, and yeah, pun right there.
Oh, nice.
So they can relate to what Jimmy's saying because he sounds like he's being more genuine. He's not just speaking highly of Chuck and that's it. He's highlighting the positives and the negatives about him. He's highlighting the fact that he has all these mixed feelings, which is what a normal person would feel. So he really did look sincere, and he says, I'll never be as moral or smart or as respected as Chuck. But that he's going to do everything he can in his power to become worthy of the name McGill. He wants to be the best man he can be, whether he gets the approval or not. Kim wipes a tear away, and toward the end of the speech, as I mentioned in the instant take, I started to think this was a little bit of an act because he highlighted saying, I'll be worthy of the name McGill, and that I want to be the best man I can be. And both of those made me think of the fact that he ends up adopting the name Saul Goodman. So first of all, he's not doing anything with the name McGill, and also saying best man reminded me of good man. And so I started to think he's kind of having some fun here. This isn't totally legit.
Yeah, I didn't catch on to that until the following scene. But before we go to that, another thing that I thought about while Jimmy was improvising is anytime you see this scene in a TV show or a movie, what happens is the character puts down their prepared statement and then they speak genuinely from the heart. This was that scene, but played out differently. Instead of speaking from the heart, you see somebody double down on being even more manipulative than they originally planned to.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And Kim was fooled right along with the rest of us. And so afterward, Jimmy is about to get some good news from one of the people who was in the room, saying that he got approved. And he's like, you don't even have to tell me. I already know. So that didn't look good.
Didn't you want to tell him, like, dude, chill?
Yeah.
Because before that woman even walked over to give him the news, he was talking so loud. He's like, Kim, did you see that they bought it? Those idiots, they believed every word of it. Like, dude, shush. Be quiet. What are you doing?
Yeah, and he's like, that one asshole was crying actual tears.
Well, it just tells you this is like a drug to him.
Yeah, he got a huge rush out of this, that he could manipulate so many people. Didn't even occur to him that he fooled Kim in the process. He says, that one asshole was crying actual tears. Can you believe it, Kim? Meanwhile, Kim was crying too. And she must feel so stupid and so hurt because here she is thinking, finally, Jimmy is reconciling all the stuff that happened with Chuck, and he's finally processing it. What she's wanted all along, some genuine feelings out of him. And it turns out, when you dig deep enough in Jimmy, there's nothing more there. He can fool anyone. And so that's really disturbing to her, especially in the context of right after all this, she finds out that Jimmy's going to go change his name now, which is not anything he discussed with her in advance.
Yeah, just not a big deal at all. He's just going to go, oh, yeah, I'm changing my name.
Yeah, so he is like, there's like some kind of filter between him and everyone else. It's like, you can't get it. It's hard to get a genuine face out of him. Like, the only time when he seems genuine and like truly like he's letting out his inner emotions is when he's just expressing frustration about how unfair everyone else is treating him. And that's it. Other than that, it's like everything that's coming out is a ruse.
Yeah. I mean, so much so that even when he was by himself in the parking garage screaming, I didn't buy it. I thought that he might have been faking it.
Yeah.
There was no reason to think that other than at this point, I just don't believe he's capable of really feeling anything.
That could also make Kim feel like Jimmy's got no gratitude for all the help that she gave him, because she helped so much with all of this, and then he goes and deviates from the plan, which is, that's not a huge problem, but he does it in a way which makes Kim feel like she was left in the dust. And he's going with the name change, which he never discussed with her. He got his law license back, and now he's not really showing her much respect. And it could easily make her feel like she was just used. And then after that, it's like, I really think they're done now. Like, I don't think they're going to be together for the majority of next season. And it's like, as soon as he gets what he needed from Kim, it's done. And I don't think he was deliberately using her. Like, I think he really does care about her, but not in a way that makes her feel cared about.
The reason I think they're for sure done this time is they introduced a new ingredient into the mix of what's going to destroy Jimmy and Kim. We've already seen him sort of use her, where she's given him help, and she doesn't really get anything in return for that, right? She's, with Huel and everything. We've seen him do nefarious things behind her back. We saw him sell burner phones for 6 months, and she wasn't aware of it. That's all in the mix already. But now we have something new, which is her absolute shock. And I would say she looked disturbed at what she saw once you scratch into, beneath the surface of Jimmy and you find nothing. And you see that he genuinely had no feelings about the fact that his brother died. Once she realized that that was true, he wasn't bottling anything up, he really was faking all of that. It disturbed her. That's the new ingredient. And I don't think that she can be with someone like that. I would say that there's an element of her where she's now maybe a little scared of him.
Yeah. And in some ways, Kim should have seen this coming, because all this whole episode, she's helping him engineer all these false feelings. The problem is, it seems like she was doing that only because she hoped or believed that deep down he really did feel some of this. And so they were kind of just magnifying what must have been there deep under the surface. And so she feels betrayed when it turns out there's nothing there. And she wished that he had some of those emotions that they were concocting. And when she finally realizes that it's not there, it's the rug is pulled out from under her. And she's just left standing alone there in that room, and she really must feel alone. She probably feels like she got scammed.
Yeah, she feels scammed, confused. This person that I loved or thought I loved is not who I thought.
Yeah. So I feel bad for her. At the same time, I feel like she helped to create this.
Yeah, you can't. It's hard to blame her, though, because you, by default, sort of lie to yourself and try to stick to your understanding of reality, what's going on, and you can't hold it against her for not realizing that Jimmy wouldn't feel something about Chuck. She assumed that he was just processing it differently, and people were treating him unfairly, because how can you hold it against somebody, how they handle their grief? So I think that was how she viewed things, and it would be asking a lot for her to understand that Jimmy was being totally disingenuous, across the board. So I agree with you that she's partially to blame here, and she probably feels that. She thinks, how could I have been so stupid? But it's really hard to point the finger at her totally.
Yeah. Any closing thoughts on the season finale?
Oh, when Jimmy turns around and he says, "It's all good, man." Did you notice that "it's all good, man" sounds like Saul Goodman, which is the name that he was changing his name to that name.
Whoa, wait. That's got to be like that's probably just a coincidence.
It's just a fun little reference that the writers threw in there.
Yeah. I think that's a little bit of a stretch. So what are you going to do until a year minus 10 weeks from now when Better Call Saul comes back?
Wait, what do you mean comes back? No, Monday we're going to watch the next episode. It'll be great. What are you talking?
Yeah.
Wait, are you saying that this was the finale? It's over?
Right. So Gil is no more. But I'll be back soon with some more great Saulcast for you all. And I'll find a substitute.
Hey, it's all right. I'm in heaven now.
Oh.
Hey, what's up, Werner? Sorry, Werner. My bad. Hey, Mike. Hey, Gil. Thanks for watching the show. Glad you could join us up here. Is Gus around? He's down in the other place. Oh yeah, that makes sense. They got podcasts up here? I'm Gil.
I'm Adam.
And this is Saulcast. You know that we can't stay away from this. I don't even think that we've fully processed everything that we saw in that finale, and definitely not everything we saw this season. So, Adam, I think that we've probably have at least a few more episodes in us, of Saulcast.
I think so. I think we definitely want to recap just the season as a whole and process it again. Figure out what our final thoughts are, any predictions we might have for the future. We would also consider dabbling in some of the older episodes, because as you all know, we started this podcast at the beginning of season 4, which leaves 3 seasons yet to be Saulcasted. So a lot of stones to turn over, a lot of things to analyze.
Also, a lot of connections to draw with Breaking Bad. I would love to go back and watch some of the Mike scenes, some of the Saul scenes, and just see what connections we can draw, especially for the ones we talked about, Just there's a lot to revisit there. There's also a lot of room to theorize. What's going to happen next? We haven't really talked a whole lot about Gene, and especially now that we've seen Lalo, we can revisit, some of that stuff and see where's Nacho in all this. So a lot to talk about from the past, a lot to speculate on in the future.
Right. So, although it's hard to go in between seasons, it's hard to fill that Better Call Saul shaped void in your soul. We hope to give you just a little taste of what you're missing, and we'll try to just keep putting out some discussion and quench that thirst as best we can. Oh, and stay tuned for what I think is going to be the best thing ever. It's a very special Saulcast Halloween. You will not see it coming. Well, you will, because I just mentioned it, but we have a twist that we think you'll like.
Yeah, definitely. You're going to want to stay tuned for that. If you're like me and you love Halloween, then you will love this episode. If you're not in the Halloween spirit, this will get you there. And it'll be more Better Call Saul content. So you're going to want to stay subscribed and watch your feed for the next week or two.
And if you just need to hear the sweet sound of our voice, our collective, opinions on things, and you don't care what we're talking about, why not check out our new podcast, Gil Reads Comics?
Everyone loves it, even if you're not a reader of comics. Let's ask my 2.5-year-old niece just for fun.
What's your favorite podcast?
Gil Reads Comics.
See? Even she listens. And she's never read a comic. Adam, why don't you play that trailer for us?
In a world.
You lost the trailer, so you don't want me to know?
Yeah.
So you just try and fake it? Yeah, I'll play the trailer now. In a world where there's two people talking about comic books. Hey, Adam, I can see you saying all that right now. Why don't you just play the actual trailer? As our world hangs in the balance, two heroes have been charged with one simple mission: recap and review comic books. On today's episode, we're talking about Amazing Spider-Man Issue 1. Only problem is, one of them has never read a comic book in his life. You've never read one of the comics?
No.
Wow, okay.
I've seen a physical book before, but I just looked at the cover.
But don't worry, Gil has done the research, and he'll help them along the way. Oh yeah, by the way, Peter Parker. He's Spider-Man.
Okay.
The drama. Because we need those stories to get through the day, through the hard times. This is my story, the one I play in my head while everything goes wrong. The action. He sees him in lizard form, he starts freaking out. He starts telling everybody, "Don't panic!" Spider-Man, I will stop you with my black goo. I'm not sure what that was, but hey, there's movie news too. Venom. Coming to a theater near you this Friday. Are you gonna see it?
Eventually.
Gil Reads Comics. Available in the Apple Podcasts app or any other podcast app today. Just search Gil Reads Comics. That's Gil Reads Comics. See the show notes for a link.